can we get people to vote by tricking them on dating apps? That's what we're gonna have a conversation about, kind of. Okay, joining me is Cristina Tzintzún Ramirez. She was a candidate in Texas recently. She's the executive director of NextGen America. And Cristina, tricking might be a loaded term.
I think that's unfair. That's unfair. We're not tricking people. We're telling them in our profiles. They're organizers, volunteers with NextGen America. Like our profilers literally say, "Don't be surprised. I'm going to ask you about your registration status." Things like that.
Okay, so let's break it down. Okay, so I want to talk about this, then we'll talk about NextGen and all and everything else too. But as I read the stories about what you guys are doing, there's one thing I just couldn't understand. So is it, of course you guys are not actually catfishing people like, oh, come this way, come this way. Just kidding, now you're gonna be forced to vote.
You came to the polling booth, you didn't know we brought you to the voting booth.
Right, red polling booth lobster. No, so what do they see when they go on there, and how do you lead them to voting through the dating apps?
So we have thousands of volunteers across the country and organizers, and so people are on Bumble, Hinge, and Tinder, and on Bumble there's also BFF, people finding their best friends, and so they'll see our bios are things like hot girls, gays, and they's vote. Are you registered to vote? Young people can swing elections. I'm an organizer with NextGen. Let me tell you about voting. There's nothing sexier than someone that's registered to vote. So it says all kinds of things in our bios, our volunteers. And then when they start a conversation, just like a lot of folks do about what they care about, and our volunteers will talk about issues they care about and then invite the other people to share what they care about and then ask them if they're registered to vote or if they need to check their registration status, and they help them do that.
I see what you did there. So you put you can swing an election in the swinger section. I got it.
We need to help us with our framing. I hadn't even thought about that one yet.
Okay, so does it work?
Yeah, we have. So we did the program in Arizona in 2020 as a pilot program, and we saw a lot of success with it. There was a lot of folks going to dating apps because of COVID, a huge increase of people using dating apps, a 90% increase across the country. And then also we've seen in Gen Z and millennials, some studies have shown that 35% of young people are just going online on things like Bumble to find friends. So it works. We've been tracking people and seeing and making sure they're getting registered. And because it worked well in Arizona, now we're pushing it out to 7 other states across the country. And NextGen, we are texting millions of young people. We're registering hundreds of thousands of young people. We are the largest youth voting rights organization in the country. And so we want to make sure we're everywhere young people are, including on dating apps. So it's not the only way they hear from us, but it is a key way that we're sliding into people's DMs and making sure that they know when, where, and how to vote and why it's important.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I'm gonna come back to that in a second, but I'm gonna divert for a sec because it's related to the same topic. You ran for Senate in Texas and you did really well. You barely missed the top 2, right? Which would have gotten you into a different category in another election, et cetera. But you chose not to run again and do this. Out of curiosity, why?
Yeah, and there's actually a congressional seat that opened up in my district, but I decided not to run. There's some other great people running, including Greg Casar, a young millennial as well himself that's running as a progressive. I decided not to run because I was able to bring NextGen to Texas, and Texas is the 3rd youngest state in the country. People have an image of our state of white cowboys, and there's a lot of great old white cowboys in our state, but our state is actually majority young, brown, and black. So 1 in 3 eligible voters is under the age of 30 in Texas. Only Utah and Alaska are younger. And if you change Texas, you change the entire country. And there has been total lack of investment and belief in the power of young people, especially young people of color in our state. And so when I became the executive director of NextGen America, part of me taking this job was a requirement that they come to Texas, and Texas now makes up one of the largest line items of any state just because of sheer size of Texas. And so now we are the largest youth voter mobilization group in the entire state. And I really do believe if you change the state, you change the entire political calculation, not just for an election cycle, but a generation. And young people in this state have that power.
That's actually a secret that a lot of people don't know about California. It's a very young state, and that's why it went overwhelmingly for Bernie Sanders as he lost in a lot of the older states on Super Tuesday. He still won here convincingly, and it's mainly based on demographics. So that leads to two questions related to the core mission of what you guys are doing. So number one, I always talk about the polling that shows how overwhelmingly progressive younger voters are. How true is that in your experience?
Yeah, so there are 65 million young voters across this country, and they are overwhelmingly progressive. They're the voters that voted for Bernie Sanders, but they're also voters that want action on climate change, that support healthcare for everyone, that support LGBTQ equality, that want racial justice and policing reform. So on every single issue, young voters are like pushing the Democratic Party, right? In my experience, young people are really key voters in the progressive and Democratic camp. Even if they don't see themselves as Democrats, they're still overwhelmingly progressive. But I think what's key about young voters, one is that they have been turning out in larger numbers, in part because of the work of NextGen and many others across the country, and also amazing insurgent candidates that are progressives, inspiring young people. But demographics, you mentioned, because California is so young, demographics are not destiny. Bernie also won California because he put money into young voters and he spoke to their pain and to their power. And that's what's really critical. It's not enough for people to just believe that one demographics will make shifts in this country after the census, or to believe that candidates can win just because they're Democrats. Young voters are super savvy and they want big, bold policy change that's gonna create structural change in this country. And you can see by their voting patterns, that's who they're voting for.
In fact, I mean, I don't want to talk about this too much, honestly, but there's going to be an issue for Democrats because the younger voters are almost all progressives and will vote against incumbent Democrats who are corporate Democrats, which is 90% of the party. So I don't know if I'm letting out a secret and we should just instantly stop talking about it, but or have you seen like older Democratic donors or establishment people start to slowly backpedal out of the room when they realize how progressive those voters actually are?
You know what I have seen is one, I think there's two things that need to happen in the Democratic Party. What I remind the young folks that I work with is, we are in a moment where we have inherited a massive climate catastrophe, right? A climate crisis, grotesque income inequality, and a democracy in decline. And I truly believe that the only thing that will save this country and our planet is the power of young people and their boldness and imagination and their refusal to just make change on the margins, but actually challenge the entire status quo. That being said, there are some people within the Democratic Party who that scares. But look, you can't have it both ways. You can't expect to hold power without relinquishing power to the people that need it. And so we have come a long way in the Democratic Party. Remember a few years ago when Bernie ran and people said $15 an hour was crazy, or that canceling student debt was crazy? Those things are now at the center of the Democratic Party, and we just have to make sure that we continue pushing on the other issues. And ultimately, young voters are a key progressive voting bloc, and they're not gonna show up unless there is real policy change. And I think that that's the other key message to the more moderate wing of the Democratic Party. You can't have it both ways.
So Cristina, we're gonna get to that core issue in a second, but let me just clarify for the audience. $15 minimum wage is, and the other issues that you mentioned, are at the core of progressive priorities, and they're at the core of Democratic lies. But Democrats don't want to do that, and they just showed it. So those corporate Democrats are in the exact conundrum we're talking about, because they want and need those younger voters, but under penalty of law, they do not want to deliver for those younger voters. So they'll pretend that relieving student debt is at the core, but in reality, there's nothing stopping them. Even the filibuster and the parliamentarian can't stop him on that. Joe Biden can do it under executive authority. He's choosing not to because he never meant it. He was lying all along. So the Democratic Party has to figure out who they are. If they're the serial liars that are the moderate Democrats, Well, it doesn't matter that we have the most progressive younger generation. At some point, they're going to go somewhere else. And in fact, I think they're beginning to. I think that some of them are even peeling off to the right wing because they're desperately looking for someone who isn't obviously lying. So then that gets to the question of when are these mythical people will say, I believe in them. I believe in them with all my heart, right? But people will say, when are these mythical younger voters ever going to show up to make a difference in these elections?
Well, I mean, in 2020, we had the highest youth voter turnout in American history, and they went and defeated fascism. We would still have Trump in office if it weren't for the power of young people across this country. The newest census came out and it says, look, we are a diverse and growing country, and the power of young people is huge. It's a huge political force. But again, demographics are not destiny. I also think, as an organizer and at NextGen, we are pushing the Biden administration to deliver on student debt and not just cancel 10,000, but which was the campaign promise, which is to go above and beyond that. This is an economic drain for an entire generation of Americans. And ultimately at NextGen, we're not just fighting to cancel student debt. We believe that college should be affordable and free for every single American, that we're way behind our partners in nearly every other industrialized nation on the planet. And so, we're fighting for that long-term progressive change. But as an organizer, I always say, we don't sit out an election. We organize and keep fighting until our demands are met. And we have come a long way. We're still not where we need to be, but that's why we keep voting, organizing, mobilizing, and demanding the change that we know we deserve.
Cristina, here's a tip you probably can't use. I don't know your organization's infrastructure. But what we're doing is we're telling young progressives, go out and vote in primaries. Vote against Democratic incumbents and vote for progressives in those primaries, because that's something that'll actually make a difference. And that's something where they could have a huge impact. Telling them that Joe Biden isn't lying to you just isn't gonna work. And so, Cristina, I'll make a terrible prediction here. I'll do it in the context of an excellent point you just made. I don't want people to gloss over it. I know, and I showed it after the election, it was younger voters that got Biden the victory. It's not just that they exist, all the voters got him the victory in a sense. It was the margin of the younger voters that made the difference, right? And so the terrible prediction is they're not gonna show up next time. The Democrats lied too many times. It's the boy who cried wolf. So when the younger voters don't show up in that margins, 2024 is gonna be a bloodbath.
I mean, here's where I think is that we also have to push and organize. I will always say, for me, it's never been, I'm a progressive that cares most about people, not about a single politician, not about a party. And that's how we are at NextGen. Ultimately, we are progressives, but we are fighting for progressive change. That extends beyond one party or one politician. And if the party that most aligns with us is wrong on an issue or not where they need to be, we keep organizing. I think we can push and push until we win and get the Biden administration to cancel student debt. I'm gonna keep organizing until that happens.
Yeah, and by the way, that's what I'm doing now. The only way that you're gonna get Biden to move on it is by humiliating him. Because otherwise, the only thing he cares about is his own ego and legacy. If you don't embarrass him, he'll just do what his donors want.
I mean, but it's also like political calculation. How young people, we just finished all of these studies across states. Young people, their number one issue that they're talking about is economic anxiety, deep economic pain for an entire generation. More young people live with their parents today than at the end of the Great Depression. And a lot of older folks don't understand this. Young people aren't just like, living in their parents' basements because it's fun. They're living there because they have an enormous amount of student debt. And so the political need for the Biden administration to cancel student debt is advantageous for them. If nothing else, we hope that the administration will see that it is in their best political interest for survival to cancel student debt for millions of Americans. Look, Already today, 1 in 5 student debt borrowers are in default already. People aren't even able to pay it back. It's a ridiculous burden and it's a bubble that's ready or already bursting.
Well, the number one guy who doesn't understand that, unfortunately, is Joe Biden. If you remember during the campaign, when asked about the pain that millennials and Gen Z are going through, he said, "Oh, give me a break. They don't have it bad at all." It's just a weirdo, cranky old man who didn't mean anything he said. If he's the candidate in 2024, we're in deep trouble. The guy's hooked on donor money, like a total addict. And so, Cristina, if you don't move him, and it's all on you.
It's all on me. It's all on me by myself in my living room here. Yeah.
Seriously, if we don't move him together on at least $10,000 in student debt, no young person is ever going to believe anything he says, and we're going to get killed by fascists in 2024. Politically.
Well, let's get it done because I think we can get it done, but we've got to keep pushing, like on your show and folks organizing and voting and saying, hey, this is my #1 issue. Go make the policy change that you have the power to do with your pen right now.
All right, Cristina, Tzintzún, Ramirez fighting the good fight. Thank you so much, we appreciate it.
Thanks so much, take care.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.